I'm going to be entirely honest with you. I don't script these. These are always off the cuff, but I normally have laid out, at least what I want to talk about. I'll read an article, I'll follow a Twitter thread, whatever people are talking about over that course of the day, whatever I'm interested in, that's what I want. This is almost completely unlaid out at all. I just need to attempt to emotionally unpack something with you. And hopefully we're going to make progress together because I think a lot of the footballing world has struggled to unpack this. Because there's something going on. There is something going on in the Premier League that is unprecedented. There is something going on in the Premier League era that is unbelievable. And yet it feels dirty. It feels disconnected. It feels like, when Real Madrid achieves all of its greatness in the Champions League, there isn't this twinge of, like, it just feels dirty. The difference being, like, I try to reach for a metaphor. What do I have? The difference seems to be making your own hamburger at home, where you kind of go through every step of the process, and then you buy one from McDonald's. The one you get from McDonald's is also probably great. I mean, I love McDonald's, but you just feel a little dirty after it. Well, Manchester City is the McDonald's in this situation because they've won 4 consecutive Premier League titles, right? And I think if you look at the players on the field and what they've been able to do, it's unbelievable. I mean, it's absolutely unbelievable. If Arsenal or Manchester United or Liverpool or Chelsea, if any of those clubs, right, were doing it, and it would be, nobody would ever shut up about how unbelievable that team was and where it was at in the annals of history, in the same way that nobody ever shuts up about how good Real Madrid is in the Champions League, how they have that just kind of voodoo. Even down to the players on Manchester City. You look at somebody like Kevin De Bruyne, where people are afraid to call him the best midfielder in the history of the Premier League. I don't know how you don't call him the best midfielder in the history of the Premier League, right? Like, who else is going to be on that list in the era? I mean, he's won 6 Premier League titles in the last 7 years. He also has a Champions League, a couple of FA Cups, a couple of League Cups, like I think 4 or 5 League Cups at this point for De Bruyne. Like, he's unbelievable. Or maybe you shift over to like a Kyle Walker. Gvardiol was absolutely unbelievable this year. Phil Foden. I mean, hell, the first goal he scored today in that freaking last match against West Ham is unbelievable. I mean, that is world class. That is he has become the type of player Pep Guardiola was telling us that he would be. A lot of these individual guys are just so incredible, but there is this little feeling of dirt that I have. Like this, you're just queasy, you're uncomfortable, you're a little off balance, and you feel like anytime that you go through a list where you praise people like that, you have to include like this massive qualifier. And I think there are obviously 2 reasons for this. I am always comfortable when we're talking about uncomfortable. I'm always uncomfortable when talking about state-owned clubs. It is inherently uncomfortable to me. There is just a difference between there being one individual owner or some sort of conglomerate or company that owns it and an actual country. It just feels different, right? It feels like there's just some sort of ulterior motive. Even if there's not, it just feels like that, right? Like, I'm not in the rooms, who am I, just some dude sitting in a chair to be passing this sort of judgment? But you can't deny that it just feels a little uncomfortable. Right, because even if you're Arsenal and you have the Kroenkes owning the club, yeah, they're worth like, I don't know, billions of dollars, probably plural, right? But they're also not like a state in a government. And I know technically Manchester City is not owned by a state or a government. They're owned by some member of the royal family. But would you reasonably be telling me that if, that King Charles just bought Toulouse, like, you wouldn't be like, oh, King Charles is the owner of Toulouse. And I was like, no, it's the English royal family. It is, the English government is involved in the ownership of this club. Like, that's what's going on in these situations. And that feels weird. Obviously, because there is a bit of a culture clash in terms of the way that maybe the culture in the country that is running this particular club, there's culture clash between things that I would believe and things that they're doing in that country, right? But like, there is also a financial side of it where there is a clear financial advantage that existed from the moment they purchased Manchester City. And I remember this was before the era of FFP. I'm always struck by how young some of the people that watch YouTube are, right? Because you never assume people are that much younger than you. But yeah, when Manchester City was purchased, there was no FFP. They spent a stupid amount of money trying to build up a team very quickly to be able to compete with the other big teams. It didn't necessarily work too well until all of a sudden, Aguero, and they won. But I think that there is a third part to this. There's a third part, and don't worry, I'm going to get to the charges, but there's a third part to the dirty stuff outside of the charges, right? Is, owned by a country that might be operating a certain way. The financial advantage of being owned essentially by there's a difference between the type of wealth individuals have and the type of wealth that countries have, right? And that kind of country wealth, especially when you're talking about oil wealth coming from that Middle Eastern area, it's just unfair. But the third part of this is that Manchester City is also just beating everybody's ass. And that is flipped it, because everybody what I always blows my mind is like the last time Manchester City was remembered fondly was that Aguero play. Where they were the underdogs. Everybody at the time hated Manchester United because they had Sir Alex Ferguson and they were beating everybody's ass. And so Manchester United was, annoying. They always took the best players and they were winning all the time. And then this downtrodden local rival of Manchester United stuns them on the final day. Those video compilations will, they'll always bring a tear to your eye. Those videos of all the City fans like sitting there, those City fans that had supported their club in the third division and whatever, born and bred Manchester City fans, being able to celebrate just the most magic moment you could possibly imagine if you support any sports team ever. It's not ever going to get better than that. But then over the course of the past decade, after the Aguero moment, we've now hit a point where Manchester City has won 6 of the last 7 league titles. They are the people beating everybody's ass. And so that is, I think, where some of this vitriol comes as well. Not necessarily from me. I always love underdogs. So of course, I want Manchester City to lose. But a lot of the dirt on it comes from me that there's an obvious financial advantage for Manchester City. Just like I said, state-owned clubs make me queasy, but I'll stay on track here. That brings us to the charges, right? Which I think I understand the way that this whole charge thing needs to work, that it has to operate slowly. It's 115 charges. I made a whole video on the main YouTube channel about how complex the charges against Manchester City are. They are way harder to judge than things like Everton, where they basically admit how much they spent and they say, hey, don't we get like a COVID pass? And the league's like, no, right? But you have to go in, and it is really hard to prove what the actual value of a sponsorship is supposed to be if you're accusing Manchester City of inflating sponsorships. Obviously innocent until proven guilty. I find it hard to believe Manchester City didn't do a lot of the things that they're saying that they did, which if you don't understand what the charges were before, it's basically a lot of that. It's, hold on, I need to find what the actual charges are. I have that up some here. So it's 54 breaches of failure to provide accurate and up-to-date financial information from 2009 to 2018. So it's 54 different instances of not providing accurate and up-to-date financial information to the league monitoring office. And then they have 35 of the 115 charges that are a failure to cooperate with the investigation. So they're charged 35 separate times for obstructing the investigation. Now, that is always something that if you're familiar with like legal proceedings, very difficult. Like that is you can argue that basically until the cows come home, right? Like even after the cows are home, you can keep arguing about whether you were obstructing an investigation or not. Failure to provide accurate financial reports for player and manager compensation. So that's 14 alleged breaches. So essentially what that means is saying that Manchester City underreported how much they were paying for the salary of a player or a coach. So they're accused of breaching that 14 times. They breached the Premier League profit and sustainability 7 times from 2015 to 2018. So like the actual profit and sustainability rules, and 5 breaches of UEFA's regulations for licensing and fair play, which are basically the same things as the breaches that are happening against Premier League FFP. So a lot of these charges are very hard to parse. 35 charges for failure to cooperate, 14 charges where you have to essentially go and prove that they provided compensation that was not reported, right? This is way more complex to have to deal with than Everton or Nottingham Forest, where they basically admit that the wrongdoing happened, but they're arguing for a reason why it should be looked past. And then these 54 charges for failing to provide accurate and up-to-date information, well, then you have to track down what that accurate and up-to-date information is on 54 separate occasions. So all of that is to say, I understand that this has to move slowly, but it just sucks. I mean, sometimes it just feels like there's not a solution here. Like, it just sucks. Because if Manchester City did all of these things, right, they very maliciously manipulated the FFP, essentially to be able to still spend a ton of money, to be able to spend the same type of money that a Manchester United or a Chelsea is able to spend without the same level of revenue, without the same level of infrastructure coming in, when they should have been more a peer of, like, I don't know, Aston Villa. I don't really where the numbers come in. And it's probably impossible to ever know what their actual revenue was supposed to be over this time, because they were just lying about it. It appears allegedly they were lying about it over the course of the last, this is a decade, right? That they were basically lying. They're being accused of lying about how much money they were making, essentially. But there's also that other point where that kind of pulls me in this other direction, where I go, I never really liked FFP. I always thought FFP was a little weird because it just keeps big clubs big and small clubs small. Like, if you do have somebody, like, obviously I wish it wasn't a state for the reasons I've already talked about, right? But if you have somebody come in and they become a billionaire and they buy their favorite club and they want to just spend money out their nose, right, to be able to make that club great, FFP doesn't allow that to happen. That's why Newcastle didn't just go buy all the best players in the world, even though Newcastle's bankroll is like $500 billion, right? Like, they can't actually just go and buy all the best players. They're restrained by FFP. That's a good thing, right? Because I don't think Saudi Arabia's royal family should be able to own a club, because I don't think states should be involved in owning clubs, obviously. But the FFP has always felt weird to me. And the lying that Manchester City was doing, in order, like, the cheating that they were doing, that they're alleged to be doing, which is fluffing how much money they're making, which allows you to spend more money under FFP, right? It's not like they ran up a ridiculous net deficit on transfers or anything. Like, obviously the first 6 or 7 years that, Manchester City got new ownership, they spent a ridiculous amount of money. But once FFP kicked in, the net transfer, they have a better net transfer than Manchester United. They have a better net transfer than a couple of clubs in the Premier League. It's not like Manchester City just spent for the success that it has now. Manchester City absolutely spent for the success that it had in 2012. They spent a stupid amount of state money with no supervision to get that Aguero moment. But we don't think of that Aguero moment as tainted as we think of the team now being tainted. There are rules. And when you sign up to play in a league and you break the rules, you should be punished. My belief is that if they are guilty of all of these things, there's no reason to trust Manchester City will be okay in the future. I think you need to I think you need to relegate them. I honestly believe that there is no way to make them get the memo with any sort of fine. I even think a serious point deduction wouldn't get it across, because they would stay in the league. I think you need to relegate them. How far? I don't know. I don't know the bylaws of the Premier League. But I'm a believer, like, if they did all of these things, then relegate them. This is the only way they're going to get the message that you're actually serious about enforcing this stuff. And I know it's taking forever. I'm not one of those people that's like blaming them for taking forever. We already talked about why it's so complicated. But if they did all of these things, you need to relegate them. But then at the same time, I have this other part of my brain that's watching this Manchester City play, like this Manchester City team play, and they're just boringly great. They're the best team on the planet right now. I know they're not in the Champions League final, right? Real Madrid's got their number. They've got the power of friendship and Ancelotti's eyebrow, and they're completely unstoppable. But there's a separate part of my brain that does appreciate how good Pep has been, how good the team has been. And it's almost like the bit of competitiveness on the field, like with the players they have and like people use Erling Haaland as a great example as well. They say like he was purchased for £51 million because that super agent who's now passed away, I can't remember his name, negotiated a brilliant contract to allow that release clause. It's like, yeah, well, I mean, if Manchester City didn't exist, Real Madrid does that sort of stuff all the time. Real Madrid's about to get Kylian Mbappe for free. There's nothing wrong with using the pull of your club. Like the fact that Manchester City is obviously one of, if not the best club in the world, talent-wise right now, production-wise right now, to attract players for less than their actual market value. People point out the Erling Haaland transfer a lot and say that that's like some sort of example of like dirty spending by Manchester City. I think that's just leveraging the fact that you have Pep Guardiola and Kevin De Bruyne is passing you the ball, like, or Bernardo Silva or Phil Foden, right? Like it's just one of those things where if you are one of the best teams, you can get players below market value because they want to come play for you. Not to mention Erling Haaland's dad played for Manchester City. So I think pointing at that sort of stuff is pointing at the wrong stuff. The things that really at the core make this whole unbelievable run feel dirty is the state ownership, and the fact that state ownership feels inherently unfair and like tied to something, and it just gives me every time I try and dig into it too much, it just gives me a queasy feeling. It just makes you feel like something's rotten in the sport when that sort of thing is allowed to happen. And the fact that, you know, they are breaking the rules in the FFP. Like they're breaking the rules, and we have no idea how severe the punishment's going to be. It's like the sword of Damocles is just hanging over, and at some point somebody's going to cut the string and the thing's going to fall, and then we're actually going to figure out how this whole era has been viewed. Like, I honestly, you know, I was happy for Manchester City fans in 2012, right, when they won the title, right? The whole Aguero thing is just really cool. But I kind of wish Manchester United or Chelsea or Liverpool, like Arsenal, like I wish they were winning these instead, because it wouldn't feel as weird, right? Even if it's Todd Bowley spending $1 billion, it wouldn't feel as weird. Even if it's Manchester United getting Jim Ratcliffe in there to spend a bunch of money, it wouldn't feel as weird, right? Even if it's the Kroenkes at Arsenal, like, it would not feel nearly as weird, right? If Jurgen Klopp, even though Liverpool always talks about like they don't spend a lot of money, they spent like, you know, an unbelievable amount of money on like Darwin Nunez and whatever. It's not like he's not good, right? But all of these clubs spend a lot of money, right? Don't let this like narrative get out of control that there's certain clubs that don't spend a lot of money. Now, obviously, Chelsea has taken that to a completely different level, but all of these clubs, the big clubs, with the exception of Tottenham, obviously, because Daniel Levy hates fun and success, apparently, they spend a ridiculous amount of money on players. I mean, how much do they pay for Anthony and Mudryk and like Allison was the record goalkeeper, wasn't he? When they signed Van Dijk was the record center back. Like, these clubs spend stupid money. And over the last 5 or 6 years, Manchester City spent that stupid money the best. And they had the success from that. But they also were breaking the rules to do that. Not to mention the whole state ownership thing, and they have all this money. I started this to try and unpack how I was feeling and maybe make myself feel better about this situation. But I don't think there's any way you can talk about one part of this without talking about the other of it. Like, you have to talk about the entire picture, which is hopefully what we've done in this video. I know there'll be people that'll watch this video and go like, well, how dare you praise them? Or there's going to be like people that probably Manchester City fans would be like, oh, we didn't do any of, you know, like, I get that. But it's all in the same package. And I think the reason that a lot of us watching this are just uncomfortable with it is because there is greatness in there. It's just surrounded by shit, right? And so it's hard, but to appreciate the greatness of a De Bruyne or Bernardo Silva, Haaland, Foden, right? But then still acknowledge the shit is the tightrope act that I am going to attempt to walk here. Because Manchester City are the kings of the Premier League. And based off the players that are on the field and the coach that's on the sideline, they deserve it. But based off everything else, they don't. So actually, that I feel okay with that. That sound, yeah. I'm gonna leave it there. See you guys.